The afternoon sun cast long shadows over Central Park, its golden light filtering through the swaying branches. The usual murmur of the city hummed in the background, distant horns, the rhythmic clicking of bike wheels, and the occasional bark of a passing dog. On a weathered wooden bench near the grand fountain sat a man. His coat was ragged, its edges frayed, as though it had been through years of hardship. His hood was pulled low, concealing much of his face, and his scuffed, mismatched sneakers peeked from beneath worn jeans. A brown paper bag rested beside him, slightly crumpled. To the casual observer, he was just another homeless man, someone forgotten by society, lingering in the park with nowhere else to go. But behind that disguise was none other than Donald Trump. It was an experiment, a social test of sorts. Trump wanted to see firsthand how people, especially law enforcement, treated those at society's margins. A police cruiser slowly rolled into the nearby parking lot, its presence quiet yet authoritative. Two officers emerged, their boots crunching on the gravel as they surveyed the scene. The younger of the two, Officer Martinez, had a clean-cut look, his uniform crisp, his belt tightly fastened. The other, Officer Higgins, was older, with tired eyes and a slightly rumpled appearance, as if he'd seen far too much over the years. "Another one?" Martinez muttered, nodding toward the man on the bench. "This park is turning into a shelter." Higgins sighed. "Maybe he's harmless." "Maybe," Martinez said. "But let's find out." The two officers approached with deliberate steps, their presence looming over Trump as he sat hunched on the bench. He didn't react, keeping his gaze fixed downward, as if he hadn't noticed them. "You can't sit here all day," Martinez said, his voice clipped and authoritative. "This is a public park, not your personal living room." Slowly, Trump lifted his gaze, his eyes shadowed by the hood. He didn't say a word, merely reaching into the brown paper bag beside him. Martinez's posture tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward the baton at his side. "Easy," Higgins murmured, though his voice lacked true conviction. Trump pulled out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, unwrapping it slowly and deliberately before taking a bite. He chewed with a calm, almost disinterested air, as if the officers weren't even there. "Did you hear me?" Martinez snapped. "I said you can't sit here all day. You got somewhere to be?" Trump swallowed his bite, his gaze flicking up briefly before returning to his sandwich. "I'm just eating lunch." "That's not the point," Martinez said, his tone growing harsher. "People like you make the place look bad. You scare off families, tourists." Higgins exhaled, crossing his arms. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice less aggressive than his partner's. Trump hesitated, then finally said, "Don." Martinez smirked. "Don, huh? You got a last name?" Trump took another bite, chewing slowly. "Jenkins." Martinez rolled his eyes. "Don Jenkins. Sounds made up. Let me see some ID." Trump set his sandwich down, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He handed it to Martinez, who flipped it open, scrutinizing the contents. The ID inside looked real enough, though it bore little resemblance to the disheveled man in front of them. Martinez frowned, but handed it back. "What are you doing here, Jenkins? Why aren't you at a shelter?" "I like fresh air," Trump replied simply. "Is that a crime?" Higgins shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "He's not doing anything illegal," he murmured. "Maybe not," Martinez muttered, narrowing his eyes. "But we can make it uncomfortable for him." Trump's fingers tightened slightly around his sandwich, but his expression remained neutral. "Hey!" a voice called from nearby. A woman walking her dog had stopped a few feet away, her brow furrowed. "He's not hurting anyone. Why are you bothering him?" Martinez turned toward her, his face hardening. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you." "It's a public park," she shot back. "It's his right to be here, just as much as anyone else." Higgins raised a hand. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job. Please move along." The woman hesitated, then shook her head, muttering something under her breath as she walked away. Trump watched her go, a flicker of amusement passing across his face. He set his sandwich down, brushing a few crumbs from his lap. "Am I free to go?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. "You're not under arrest," Higgins said, though his partner shot him a warning glance. "But you might want to find somewhere else to sit." Trump stood slowly, picking up his paper bag and tucking it under his arm. He was taller than they had expected, his presence suddenly more commanding. As he adjusted his hood, a stray lock of blonde hair fell forward. "Have a nice day," he said. Martinez watched him go, his expression darkening. "Did you see the way he looked at me?" he muttered to Higgins. Guy thinks he's better than us. Let it go, Higgins sighed. He's not worth the paperwork. But Martinez's jaw tightened. I don't trust him. Trump disappeared down the path, his steps slow and measured. The tension in the park began to ease, but something lingered, an unspoken challenge. A spark of defiance that hadn't been extinguished. This wasn't over. Trump walked further into the park, finding another secluded bench beneath a cluster of towering oak trees. He sat down again, placing his paper bag beside him, though this time he didn't bother pulling out the rest of his sandwich. Instead, he leaned back, exhaling slowly, his gaze lifting toward the sky. His posture was relaxed, but his mind was sharp, processing everything that had just happened. A few joggers passed by, their conversation trailing off as they noticed him. One of them, a middle-aged man wearing a sleek fitness tracker, nudged his companion. Should we call someone? The man muttered, just loud enough for Trump to hear. He looks off. Trump didn't react, keeping his expression neutral. The woman with him hesitated but ultimately shook her head. They picked up their pace, their footsteps fading into the distance. Moments later, a group of teenagers on bikes approached, their laughter loud and unfiltered. One of them, a lanky boy in a hoodie, slowed his bike, nodding toward Trump with a smirk. Check this out, he called to his friends. Yo, you homeless or something? Trump didn't respond. He simply observed, his expression unreadable. Emboldened by the silence, the boy leaned forward on his handlebars. What happened, man? You lose your house playing poker or what? His friends laughed, one of them pulling out a phone. Say something for the camera, he teased. Tell us your life story. Finally, Trump spoke. His voice was calm, but carried weight. You should get going. The laughter faltered. There was something in his tone, not a threat, but an authority that made the boys hesitate. For a moment, they seemed unsure whether to keep pushing or leave. But before they could decide, the unmistakable sound of a police cruiser approaching made their choice for them. Officer Martinez was back. The teenagers scattered like startled birds, their bikes kicking up dust as they pedaled away. Martinez barely spared them a glance. His focus was locked on Trump, who remained seated on the bench, unbothered. You again, Martinez said as he strode up. Couldn't find another park to loiter in? Trump lifted his gaze. Didn't realize that was a crime. Martinez scoffed, his irritation evident. It's not. But you're starting to push your luck. Trump said nothing. He simply picked up his paper bag and tucked it under his arm. Higgins approached, his expression strained. Martinez, come on, he sighed. We already went through this. Martinez ignored him, stepping closer to Trump. What's in the bag? He demanded. Trump tilted his head slightly. Lunch. Prove it. A slow smirk crossed Trump's face. He opened the bag and held it out. Martinez peered inside, frowning as he saw nothing but an apple, a sandwich, and a bottle of water. You got something else on you? Martinez pressed. Something you don't want us to find? Trump placed the bag down carefully, his movements deliberate. I've got nothing to hide, he said evenly, but if you're looking for trouble, I'm not the one you'll find it with. Higgins exhaled, rubbing his temple. Let's go, he said, glancing at his partner. We've got better things to do. Martinez hesitated. His instincts told him there was more to this man, something just beneath the surface, something that didn't add up. But without probable cause, there was nothing he could do. Yet. This isn't over, he muttered before turning away. Trump watched as the officers returned to their cruiser. Martinez cast one last glance over his shoulder, their eyes locking for the briefest moment. And in that silent exchange, Trump knew Martinez wasn't going to let this go. As the police car rolled away, Trump leaned back on the bench, exhaling slowly. Then, without looking, he spoke. You sure took your time. From the shadows of the nearby trees, a man in a gray hoodie stepped forward. He was cautious, his eyes flicking around as he approached. How's it going? The man asked, keeping his voice low. Trump reached into his pocket, pulling out a granola bar. As expected, he said, unwrapping it. They're suspicious, but they don't know what to do with it yet. The man nodded, shoving his hands into his pockets. Think they'll come back? They always do. Trump took a bite of the bar, chewing thoughtfully. Curiosity gets the better of them. The man in the hoodie glanced around again, his brow furrowing. You sure about this? You're pushing them pretty hard. That's the point, Trump replied smoothly. I want to see how far they'll go. Nearby, a jogger paused to retie their shoe, their gaze flicking toward the two men before quickly looking away. The man in the hoodie shifted uneasily. "Just be careful," he muttered. "If this goes sideways, it won't." Trump's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable certainty in it. "I've got this." The man hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. Without another word, he turned and disappeared back into the trees. Trump took another bite of his granola bar, his gaze locked on the path ahead. He didn't have to wait long. The police cruiser was already on its way back. The police cruiser rolled to a stop, the engine idling as Officer Martinez stepped out first, his movements stiff with determination. Officer Higgins followed more slowly, his expression a mix of frustration and resignation. Trump remained on the bench, calmly finishing his granola bar. He didn't even look up as the officers approached. "You sure like this park, huh?" Martinez said, standing in front of him, arms crossed. Trump finally glanced up, his expression unreadable. "It's peaceful." "Yeah? Well, it's starting to feel a little less peaceful with you hanging around." Trump smirked slightly. "I didn't realize sitting on a bench was causing such a disturbance." Martinez exhaled sharply, clearly trying to keep his frustration in check. "You think you're clever, don't you?" "I think I'm sitting," Trump replied smoothly. Higgins, still standing a few feet back, sighed. "Martinez, we're not doing this again." "Yes, we are," Martinez shot back. "This guy's playing us." Trump tilted his head slightly, studying Martinez. "What exactly do you think I'm playing at?" Martinez ignored the question. Instead, he gestured toward Trump's coat. "Stand up." Trump arched a brow. "Why?" "I want to see what you've got on you." Trump remained seated. "You already searched my bag. What more do you need?" "You're hiding something," Martinez snapped. "I can feel it." Trump chuckled softly. "You can feel it? That's your justification now?" Martinez clenched his jaw. "Stand up." Higgins finally stepped in, shaking his head. "We don't have cause for that." Martinez turned to his partner. "Come on, we both know something's off about him. The ID didn't come up in the system, and he's way too calm." "That doesn't mean he's done anything wrong," Higgins countered. Martinez wasn't convinced. He turned back to Trump, his patience wearing thin. "Listen, I can pull you in for loitering." Trump smirked again. "Loitering? In a public park?" Martinez's grip on his belt tightened. "Don't test me." Trump leaned back slightly, folding his arms. "I'm not testing you. I'm just watching you make a fool of yourself." That did it. Martinez took a step forward, his hand reaching toward Trump's arm. "Hey, hey, hey," Higgins interjected, stepping between them before Martinez could do anything. "That's enough." Martinez's eyes burned with frustration, his jaw tightening as he pulled back. Trump watched him calmly. "You just can't stand it, can you?" Martinez exhaled sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "That you're looking for a reason," Trump said simply. "You're not enforcing the law. You're looking for a way to prove yourself right." Higgins placed a firm hand on Martinez's shoulder. "Come on, we're done." Martinez didn't move for a long moment. He stared at Trump, his mind racing. Then, finally, he turned on his heel and stormed back toward the cruiser. Trump remained where he was, watching him go with mild amusement. Higgins lingered for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Then he shook his head and followed. As the cruiser pulled away, Martinez's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "I know he's up to something," he muttered. Higgins sighed. "Then prove it the right way, not like this." Martinez didn't answer. His jaw was tight, his mind already working. Back on the bench, Trump reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. He pressed a button, and a soft beep echoed in his ear. "They're hooked," he murmured. A voice crackled back. "Think they'll bite?" Trump smirked. "Oh, they'll bite." And with that, he leaned back, waiting for the inevitable, because he knew one thing for sure. Officer Martinez wasn't done with him yet. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting a warm orange glow over the park. The usual rush of the afternoon crowd was thinning, leaving behind only the stragglers, dog walkers, late joggers, and those who, like Trump, had nowhere better to be. But he wasn't just waiting. He was setting the stage. Trump shifted slightly on the bench, adjusting his coat as he watched the last of the joggers disappear around the bend. The park was quieter now, the perfect time for what he knew was coming next. Sure enough, the low rumble of a police engine reached his ears before he even saw the cruiser. He didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Martinez was back. The police car rolled to a stop just a few yards away, its headlights cutting through the dimming light. This time, both officers got out at the same time, their expressions set. Martinez moved first, his stride deliberate, his eyes locked on Trump like a predator honing in on its prey. Higgins followed more slowly, rubbing his temple as if already regretting whatever was about to happen. Trump let a small smile play at the corner of his lips. They just couldn't help themselves. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" Trump mused as Martinez stopped in front of him. Martinez's face darkened. "Stand up." Trump tilted his head. "Why?" "Because I said so." Martinez snapped. Higgins sighed but didn't intervene, at least, not yet. Trump studied Martinez for a moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, stood up. He was taller than Martinez had anticipated, his posture straight, confident. Not at all like a man who had spent his days drifting through the park. Something about it made Martinez's frustration flare even hotter. "Turn around," Martinez ordered. Trump arched a brow. "You planning to arrest me?" Martinez hesitated, but only for a fraction of a second. "I don't know yet." Higgins took a step closer. "Martinez, I want to see what he's got on him." Martinez cut in, his tone sharp. "If that ID was fake, then what else is he hiding?" Trump let out a low chuckle. "You really don't like not knowing, do you?" Martinez didn't answer. Instead, he reached for Trump's coat, preparing to pat him down. But Trump stepped back. Immediately, Martinez's hand shot to his belt. "Don't move." Trump held up his hands in mock surrender. "Relax." Higgins stepped forward, his tone more measured. "Sir, if you've got nothing to hide, just cooperate. Let's not make this into something it doesn't need to be." Trump exhaled, as if considering it. Then, slowly, he unzipped his coat, revealing nothing. No weapons, no stolen goods. Just a plain old coat over a sweater. "Disappointed?" he asked, his smirk returning. Martinez clenched his jaw. "Turn out your pockets." Trump obeyed, slowly reaching into each pocket and pulling out a few dollar bills, a crumpled receipt, and a key. That was it. Higgins looked at his partner. "Come on, man." Martinez was breathing heavily, his frustration mounting. "Nothing." Again, Trump smiled knowingly. "Looks like you struck out." Martinez's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You think this is funny?" Trump shrugged. "I think it's interesting." Martinez exhaled sharply, stepping even closer. "I know you're hiding something." Trump met his gaze, unwavering. "Then find it." Martinez's nostrils flared, his fingers twitching as if itching to grab Trump and drag him down to the station. But there was nothing. No charges, no reason, just a feeling. And Martinez knew that wasn't enough. Higgins finally stepped in, placing a firm hand on his partner's shoulder. "We're done here," he said quietly. "Let it go." Martinez didn't move. Then, finally, he exhaled sharply, stepping back. "This isn't over," he muttered. Trump watched him, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Oh, I know." Martinez turned on his heel, stalking back toward the cruiser. Higgins gave Trump one last, unreadable glance before following. Trump waited, hands in his pockets, as the car pulled away. Then, as soon as it was gone, he turned and walked in the opposite direction toward the trees, where a figure in a gray hoodie waited in the shadows. The man stepped forward cautiously. "Well?" Trump smirked. "They're hooked." The man nodded. "What now?" Trump's eyes glinted. "Now," he said, "we make them bite." The city lights flickered in the distance as Trump made his way toward the far edge of the park. The air was crisp now, the evening settling in, and the usual rush of commuters had mostly faded. He moved with the same slow, deliberate pace he always did, just a man with nowhere to go, just another shadow blending into the background. But he wasn't blending in. Not anymore. Behind him, hidden just well enough to think they were being subtle, were officers Martinez and Higgins. They had followed him. Trump smirked to himself. He hadn't even needed to look back to know they were there. His feet crunched against the gravel path as he neared a dimly lit street corner. He stopped, pretending to rummage in his pocket for something, giving them a moment to catch up. The cruiser's door opened, and heavy footsteps hit the pavement. "Showtime." "Going somewhere?" Trump turned slowly, his expression cool. "Didn't realize I needed permission." Martinez stepped forward, his frustration barely contained. Funny. You seem to keep popping up where we don't want you. Trump raised an eyebrow. Public spaces seem to bother you a lot. Higgins approached, arms crossed. Where are you headed? Trump smirked. Why? Need directions? Martinez clenched his jaw. Cut the act. Trump tilted his head. What act? Martinez let out a sharp breath. You're playing games with us. Trump shrugged. You're the ones following me. Martinez took a step closer, eyes burning with suspicion. Because we know you're up to something. Trump sighed, shaking his head. Let me get this straight. You followed me again because you still have nothing on me, but you just can't let it go? Martinez's hands curled into fists at his sides. We will find out what you're hiding. Trump leaned in slightly, his voice lower now. That's the problem, isn't it? You don't like not knowing. It's eating you alive. Higgins glanced between them, clearly uneasy. Look, there's no law against walking, Martinez. Martinez ignored him. Who were you meeting in the park? Trump chuckled. What makes you think I met someone? Martinez's eyes narrowed. You don't fit. Trump grinned. Now that sounds personal. Martinez's jaw tightened. He had been around enough liars, enough criminals, to recognize when someone was playing him. But this was different. Trump wasn't running. He wasn't nervous. He was enjoying this. And that made Martinez even more certain. This wasn't just some random guy in a park. This was something bigger. Higgins shifted uncomfortably. Unless we have something, we need to let him go. Martinez didn't move. He studied Trump, searching for the crack in his confidence, the hesitation, the tell. He found none. Trump held his gaze, completely unfazed. Martinez exhaled sharply. One of these days, you're going to slip up. Trump smiled. And one of these days, you're going to realize you were chasing a ghost. For a long second, neither of them moved. Then, finally, Martinez turned on his heel and walked back to the cruiser, his frustration evident in every step. Higgins lingered a moment longer, watching Trump with an unreadable expression. Then he sighed and followed his partner. Trump waited until the cruiser pulled away before reaching into his pocket. He pressed a small button on a hidden earpiece. They're getting desperate. A voice crackled back. Good, that's when they make mistakes. Trump's smirk returned. Exactly. The night air was cool against Trump's face as he strode calmly down the quiet street. The police cruiser had disappeared around the bend, but he knew better than to assume they were gone for good. They weren't finished. Not yet. Trump turned down a narrow alleyway, a shortcut leading to another side of the park. His footsteps echoed slightly against the brick walls, the sound swallowed by the distant hum of the city. A few steps in, a figure emerged from the shadows ahead. The man in the gray hoodie. You were right, the man said, his voice low. They followed you. Trump smirked. Of course they did. The man exhaled, glancing down the alley nervously. They're pushing hard. Trump nodded. That's what we want. The man hesitated. You sure about this? Trump reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, sleek device barely larger than a key fob. A recorder. He held it up between two fingers. I don't need to be sure. They're doing the work for me. The man's eyes flicked to the device, then back to Trump. And what if they catch on? Trump chuckled. They won't. At that moment, the faint glow of headlights washed over the entrance of the alley. They were back. Trump sighed, slipping the recorder back into his pocket. Right on schedule. The cruiser came to a stop, the doors opening in near unison. Martinez was out first, his expression dark. Higgins followed, his patience clearly stretched thin. You just love making us chase you, don't you? Martinez called out as he approached. Trump turned, folding his arms. I'm just walking. Martinez scoffed. Through an alley? At this hour? Trump raised a brow. Didn't realize you were the night patrol for casual strolls? Martinez's eyes flicked past him, locking onto the man in the hoodie. Who's your friend? The man shifted uncomfortably, shoving his hands into his pockets. Trump smirked. What? I can't have company now? Martinez took another step forward. You keep acting like this is a joke, but I'm done playing. Trump sighed dramatically. That's a shame. I was just starting to have fun. Higgins, who had remained a few paces back, finally stepped in. Martinez, we can't keep stopping him for no reason. Martinez shot him a look. We have plenty of reason. Higgins sighed. We have suspicion, not reason. Trump glanced between them, amusement in his eyes. Sounds like your partner's the only one thinking clearly. Martinez ignored him, pointing at the man in the hoodie. You got ID? The man hesitated. Trump, however, stepped in smoothly. He doesn't need to show you anything. Martinez's jaw tightened. That so? Trump nodded. Unless you have a warrant or a probable cause. Martinez took another step closer, his patience nearly gone. You keep pushing, but I promise you one wrong move, and I'll have you in cuffs. Trump smiled slightly. Then you better make sure it's the right move. A tense silence hung in the air. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken challenges. Finally, Higgins exhaled and shook his head. Martinez, let's go. Martinez didn't move right away. Then, with obvious reluctance, he stepped back. This isn't over, he muttered. Trump smirked. I'd be disappointed if it was. As the officers returned to their car, Trump watched them go, waiting until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Only then did he turn back to the man in the hoodie. We're almost there. The man exhaled. And when they finally take the bait? Trump's smirk widened. Then, he said, we show them the truth. The city pulsed quietly in the background as Trump and the man in the gray hoodie emerged from the alleyway, stepping back onto the dimly lit park path. The air had grown colder, the night fully settled in. The usual noise of Central Park had died down, leaving only the occasional distant laughter from late-night wanderers and the rhythmic chirping of crickets. Trump took a slow breath, savoring the moment. The pieces were falling into place. The man beside him, however, was less relaxed. They're not letting this go, he muttered. Martinez is looking for any excuse. Trump smirked. That's what we're counting on. The man shook his head. You really think they'll push it? Trump turned his gaze to the road beyond the trees, where the faint gleam of a police cruiser's headlights flickered every few minutes like a predator circling its prey. Oh, he said, eyes gleaming. They'll push it. And then, as if the universe itself wanted to prove him right, the low hum of the cruiser's engine drew closer. Right on time, Trump muttered under his breath. The police car rolled to a slow stop at the curb, and for a moment, nothing happened. Just the idle purr of the engine, the glow of the headlights casting long shadows across the pavement. Then, the doors opened. Martinez was out first, moving with sharp, clipped strides. Higgins followed, a few paces behind, his weariness clear even in the way he carried himself. Trump remained still, hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. Martinez stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable, but his body language said it all. This is the last time, he said, voice low. Trump raised an eyebrow. That so? Martinez's jaw tightened. You're done playing games. Trump chuckled. I think you're the one playing games, officer. Martinez took another step forward. Hands where I can see them. Trump let out a slow breath. Are we really doing this? You heard me, Martinez snapped. Trump glanced at Higgins. You co-signing this? Higgins didn't answer right away. He looked at his partner, then at Trump, then at the situation as a whole, like a man weighing whether this was a battle worth fighting. Finally, he sighed. Martinez. But the younger officer wasn't listening. You're coming with us, Martinez said. Trump's smirk didn't fade. On what charge? Martinez's eyes burned. I'll think of something. Trump's smile widened. Now that's exactly what I was waiting for. Before Martinez could react, Trump reached into his coat pocket slowly. Deliberate pulled out the small recording device and pressed play. A familiar voice crackled through the tiny speaker. You're coming with us. On what charge? I'll think of something. Martinez's face drained of color. The sound echoed in the quiet park, every word cutting deeper. Trump tilted his head. I don't think that's how the law works, officer. Higgins stiffened. What the hell? Trump tapped the recorder. Been running this all night. Every stop, every conversation. Martinez took a step back, his breathing uneven. You set us up. Trump laughed. Number, you set yourself up. Martinez's hand twitched at his belt, at his radio, his weapon, anything that could give him control back. But there was no fixing this. Not now. Trump slid the recorder back into his pocket. So, let me ask you, Officer Doe, you still think I'm the one with something to hide? Silence. Thick, heavy, unbreakable. Then, Finally, Higgins spoke, his voice tight, resigned. "Let's go." Martinez turned, his body stiff, his face burning with fury and humiliation. Trump watched them return to the cruiser, watched as Martinez yanked the door open with more force than necessary. And just before they drove off, Higgins looked back one last time. Not with anger, not with defiance, with something else. Recognition. Understanding. Trump held his gaze, offering the faintest nod. Then, as the cruiser disappeared into the night, he turned to the man in the hoodie. "Game over." The man let out a breath. And just like that, Trump smirked, hands back in his pockets as he strolled down the path. Just like that. And with that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving only the echoes of a lesson well taught.